Democracy, we are told, is alive in Africa. You just need a microscope, a strong stomach, and the patience of a job seeker to find it. The continent's strongmen insist that it's there, tucked neatly under the boots of their soldiers or hidden between the lines of cybercrime laws. Uganda parades its democracy like a stuffed animal. Mali buries it under decrees, and Chad imprisons it with the same ease it imprisons teenagers. Opposition leaders like Kizza Besigye, Moussa Mara, and Succès Masra are not adversaries, but props, useful scapegoats for regimes eager to display their iron grip. Their crimes: speaking too loudly, tweeting too boldly, or simply refusing to disappear. Their punishment: abduction, exile, 20-year sentences, or the ever-reliable charge of inciting public disorder. What binds them is not just persecution, it is the audacity to believe that their countries deserve better, and the misfortune of regimes that think otherwise. My name is Ashwin Bedi, and it's time for Second Take. Kizza Besigye is not just a politician. He is Uganda's most persistent national nightmare, for Yoweri Museveni at least. Every few years, like a bad cough you thought you'd shaken off, Besigye reappears with his familiar song: democracy, accountability, and an end to 40 years of rule by a man who long ago confused himself for the nation's destiny. For daring to chant these dangerous incantations, Uganda's most relentless irritant to President Yoweri Museveni is still confined in Luzira Maximum Security Prison, proving once again that persistence is apparently a crime in Uganda. His abduction from Nairobi on November 16 last year was less a legal procedure than a dramatic announcement. Borders are suggestions, not limits, when Museveni wants someone back in custody. Besigye was literally repossessed, spirited across the border, and dumped into a detention system that seems to have been designed specifically to confuse time, logic, and hope. On August 8 this year, the High Court in Kampala, presided over by Justice Emmanuel Baguma, denied Besigye and his co-accused Haji Obeid Lutale bail for the third time. The reason? The court calculated the mandatory 180-day remand period from the date of their transfer to civilian courts on February 21, conveniently ignoring the months Besigye spent in military detention. Constitutional lawyers everywhere collectively just face-palmed. The argument that time in military custody should count toward the 180-day limit was dismissed, proving once again that legal interpretation in Uganda is flexible. Bend it enough and law becomes the regime's plaything. It's almost impressive how the system can turn basic arithmetic into a tool of intimidation. Besigye, along with Lutale and the UPDF officer Captain Dennis Ola, faces charges that sound like something out of a spy novel: treason, misprision of treason, and illegal possession of firearms. According to the prosecution, they supposedly solicited guns and logistical support across Geneva, Athens, Nairobi, and Kampala between 2023 and 2024 to overthrow the Ugandan government. Let that sink in. A man whose primary weapons are a stethoscope, a microphone, and a stubborn refusal to go quietly is accused of international conspiracy. One can almost imagine the evidence. Besigye clutching a baguette in Geneva, whispering subversive slogans to unsuspecting bakers, or perhaps assembling an insurgent cell in a cafe in Athens while sipping espresso. The charges are so grandeur, they are comical, yet they carry the very real possibility of the death penalty. Museveni, of course, insists that these charges are necessary to protect national security, which roughly translates to, "I'm too paranoid to risk a doctor who keeps embarrassing me." The absurdity is not lost on the public. And in fact, it is precisely this absurdity that keeps Besigye alive as a symbol. The trial was originally scheduled in a military court, a venue whose decor includes guns and intimidation, where civilians are basically extras in a show designed to showcase state power. A Supreme Court ruling on January 31 this year finally barred military courts from trying civilians, and the case was transferred to the High Court's Criminal Division. Yet, even in the civilian setting, due process is treated like a suggestion rather than a requirement. The trial date remains a mystery. Besigye has been detained for over 267 days without any real progress. Each day in Luzira sends a clear signal to opposition figures: speak up, and the government can hold you indefinitely without trial, turning justice into a slow psychological torture. The message is loud, simple, and intimidating. Defiance is a public inconvenience to be punished theatrically. Legal and human rights concerns have been raised loudly and repeatedly. Besigye's legal team, led by Arias Lukwago and Frederick Mpanga, argues that continuous detention since November 2024 exceeds the constitutional 180-day limit for mandatory bail under Article 23(6)(c). They condemned the abduction as illegal, the military court detention as a form of psychological torture, and the ongoing delays as a perverse form of state bullying. The UN Human Rights Office and Human Rights Watch have expressed concern over repeated bail denials and urged Uganda to comply with international human rights standards. But international pressure, as is often the case with Yoweri Museveni, is met with polite smiles, carefully worded denials, and the assumption that global outrage will fade before the next election cycle. It is what it is. Aid continues to flow, military cooperation continues, and the West's interest in Uganda's stability as a regional counter-terrorism partner allows Museveni to act as he pleases. He has mastered the art of selective compliance. Obey the rules when convenient, ignore them when inconvenient, and maintain a veneer of legitimacy at all other times. The bail denial sparked immediate outrage among supporters. Social media erupted, with posts ranging from calls for Besigye's immediate release to sarcastic commentary on Kenya's complicity in his abduction, confirmed by Kenyan Foreign Minister Moussa Mara. Opposition figures like Bobby Wine and Besigye's wife, Winnie Bayanyima, publicly condemned the ruling as an attempt to punish Besigye for being abducted and then detained illegally. A rare case where the victim is on trial while the abductor is praised for protecting stability. The irony is palpable. Museveni treats one man's persistence as a threat to national security while presiding over 4 decades of consolidated power, electoral manipulations, and occasional disappearances of political rivals. It is as if Uganda's most dangerous insurgency is not militias, not rebels, but a doctor who refuses to stay quiet. The charges themselves reveal a regime that fears symbolism more than substance. Treason for a man who has spent decades mobilizing votes, not bullets, illustrates a leadership terrified of ideas. Misprision of treason and illegal possession of firearms, charges seemingly designed to terrify, highlights the lengths to which Museveni will go to appear omnipotent while controlling every narrative. His court calculations, delays, and procedural maneuvers serve a dual purpose: punish Besigye and turn him into a living warning. The message is still very clear to every Ugandan. Persistence, visibility, and a refusal to disappear are dangerous acts. Yet here's the paradox. In trying to crush him, Museveni has created a symbol more powerful than any campaign slogan. Besigye's endurance, defiance, and unwillingness to vanish amplify his voice rather than silence it. Luzira may confine his body, but it cannot confine the ideas he represents: accountability, resistance, and the audacity to challenge a regime that has been comfortable in power for 4 decades. Every denied bail, every procedural trick, every high court calculation that ignores military detention strengthens his image. Museveni has essentially made Besigye a permanent feature of Uganda's national imagination, a warning, a hero, and a persistent reminder that authoritarian power is often more fragile than it appears. In Uganda, this is what stability looks like: a president who fears one man's voice more than armed rebellion, a legal system that bends to power, and an opposition that must navigate detention, abduction, and procedural absurdity. Besigye's story is grotesque, frustrating, and deeply ironic. The regime's greatest fear is not ballots or coups, not armies. It is the unyielding persistence of a man who refuses to be erased. Every new court ruling, every denial of bail, every postponement of a trial is intended to crush him, but it instead sharpens his legend. Museveni, with all his decades in power, has managed to make a simple truth apparent: terrorize the opposition long enough, and they become icons. Bends the law to intimidate, and the spectacle highlights your own fragility. Abduct a persistent doctor, and he turns into a national conscience. Luzira is full of men with power, but the most dangerous inhabitant remains the one Museveni cannot cage, the one whose courage and persistence prove that authority without accountability is a joke, and the joke's punchline is Besigye himself. Mali's current definition of crime is simple: say something on X, Twitter, we don't like, and we'll put you in prison. Moussa Mara, a former prime minister, learned this lesson the hard way. On July 4 this year, he posted a poetic line: "As long as the night lasts, the sun will inevitably rise." For this literary optimism, Mara was arrested, charged with undermining the state, opposing legitimate authority, inciting disorder, and my personal favorite, spreading false information. Imagine being jailed, not for corruption or theft, but for sounding too hopeful online. Colonel Assimi Goita, Mali's head of state, must have read the post and seen a coup attempt hidden between the metaphors. Perhaps he thought the rising sun was a code word for France, or maybe just a reminder that he's running out of time before dawn catches up with him. Whatever the paranoia, the junta responded with surgical precision. Deploy the cybercrime prosecutor. Not the anti-terrorism unit, not the corruption task force, the cybercrime prosecutor. Mali, a country drowning in insurgencies, famines, and corruption, has apparently decided that its biggest enemy is a man tweeting metaphors. Mara's case is not isolated. It's part of a broader strategy. Silence all political voices, disband political parties, done in May 2024, and grant Goita a renewable 5-year term, done in June 2025. The junta has converted itself into Mali's permanent landlord. The people are tenants, and their rent is silence. Social media, once the last refuge of dissent, is now booby-trapped. Say the wrong thing and you'll be interrogated, grounded at the airport, or thrown into pre-trial detention. Mara was interrogated multiple times in July, stopped from leaving the country, and finally arrested. His crime was not the tweet itself, but the stubborn insistence that he still had rights in a country that has abolished them. The charges are laughably vague, undermining the credibility of state, as though the state hasn't already done that by staging 2 coups in 5 years. Opposing legitimate authority, What authority? The junta dissolved political parties and banned opposition. What's left to oppose? Inciting disorder, Mali is already in disorder. Whole swaths of territory are under militant control. The state barely functions outside Bamako. If anything, Mara's optimism was the most orderly thing in the country. But behind the absurdity lies a chilling logic. Goita and his circle know that their survival depends on fear. They can't deliver prosperity, they can't deliver peace, so they deliver silence. Mara, with his poetic lines and calls for conscience, punctures that silence. And that is intolerable. So they hold him before courts that pretend to be legal, but are little more than theater productions with soldiers in the front row. Mara's supporters, of course, see him as a symbol. He is not just a former prime minister. He is a reminder that politics could once be about dialogue, elections, and legitimacy. His arrest is designed to erase that memory. If Malians forget that democracy ever existed, they won't demand its return. This is the psychological war being waged, not just the suppression of dissent, but the suppression of memory. International organizations have condemned his detention. Human rights groups call for his release, and the Western governments issue press statements. But Goita has a new best friend, Russia. By aligning with Moscow, Mali's junta has inoculated itself against Western pressure. The Wagner Group, or its post-Wagner equivalents, now guard both the mines and the regime. So Mara's plight may stir sympathy abroad, but it won't stir consequences. For ordinary Malians, Mara's arrest is one more sign that the junta intends to stay forever. Political life has been shrunk to whispers in homes and coded jokes on WhatsApp. To speak openly is to invite surveillance, arrest, or worse. But silence breeds resentment. Mali's youth, who make up the majority, are not blind. They see a country where soldiers swap fatigues for suits, but keep the guns close by. They see the transition to democracy stretching indefinitely like a night that promises dawn, but never delivers. And so Mara sits in detention, waiting for a September trial that is already decided. His case will be cited as proof of due process, a fig leaf for a system that no longer believes in laws. His tweet will be dissected like contraband literature, and the verdict will likely confirm what everyone knows. In Mali, freedom of speech is freedom of suicide. Yet there is power in his defiance. By refusing to stay quiet, by insisting on calling prisoners of conscience what they are, Mara has exposed the fragility of the junta. A regime that feels threatened by poetry is a regime that knows its own weakness. Goita, with all his soldiers and guns, is afraid of words. And that is the ultimate satire. The man with tanks cannot sleep at night because of a sentence on a screen. Mwah. Succès, you pronounce it how you want. Masra's story reads like a parody of justice. A young leader daring to organize and speak against Mohamed Idris Déby's transitional regime now sits in prison with a 20-year sentence. His crime? Inciting violence, undermining the state, and daring to gather people who believe Chad deserves a future beyond military dynasties. His supporters, including minors, have been swept into detention. And because irony is apparently the national language, Masra is on hunger strike, starving his body to highlight the famine of justice consuming his country. Chad is not new to authoritarian rule. Déby inherited the throne of power after his father's death, proving that in Chad, democracy is not about votes, but about genetics. The regime wraps itself in the excuse of national security, pointing to ethnic tensions and rebel threats as justification for its iron fist. But the truth is simpler. Chaos is useful. As long as Chad looks unstable, the regime can pose as the necessary guardian. Masra, with his articulate voice and broad appeal, punctured that narrative. That made him dangerous. His conviction on August 9 was a masterclass in judicial choreography. Trials in Chad are not about evidence or fairness. They are about morality plays staged to send a message. The message this time was loud: organize against the regime and you will be branded an enemy of the state. International observers can shout all they want. Inside Chad, the only voice that matters is Debby's, and it echoes through the courts, prisons, and barracks. The persecution of Masra is also ethnic in flavor. By framing his mobilization as a threat to communal harmony, the regime taps into Chad's deep-seated fractures. Divide and rule is the oldest playbook in politics, and Deby has studied it well. Opposition is not just political, it is portrayed as tribal, destabilizing, dangerous to the nation's fragile balance. Thus, imprisoning Masra is not tyranny, it is protection. But the absurdity of it all is undeniable. Here is a man whose weapon is his voice, treated as though he were an armed insurgent. His hunger strike is a stark mirror, a leader slowly starving while the government feasts on power. His supporters, some still in their teens, languish in cells for the crime of believing in him. This is not justice. It is hostage-taking, masquerading as law. International condemnation has followed, as expected. Human rights organizations call for his release. The United Nations expresses concern, as they be doing, but Chad, like Mali and Uganda, has mastered the art of shrugging off global outrage. After all, Western powers rely on Chad as a counter-terrorism ally in the Sahel. As long as Deby plays his role as the region's security subcontractor, his domestic repression is tolerated. Masra can rot in prison, and the world will keep shaking Deby's hand. For Chadians, Masra's imprisonment is devastating. He represented a rare spark of hope in a system designed to extinguish it. His youth, his eloquence, his ability to rally people across divides, these made him dangerous precisely because they made him credible. The regime thrives on hopelessness. Masra thrived on possibility. The collision was inevitable. And yet, even from his cell, Masra still speaks. His hunger strike is communication in its rawest form. If you will not hear my words, hear my silence. Here is my wasting body. It is both protest and prophecy, a reminder that repression cannot erase the longing for change. The real tragedy is not just Masra's imprisonment, but what it reveals about Chad's political DNA. The country has never known peaceful transfer of power. Leaders are either killed, overthrown, or inherit the throne. Elections are window dressing. The people's will is decorative. By sentencing Masra, Deby is not just punishing an opponent, he is punishing the idea that Chad could be different. 3 men, 3 countries, 1 lesson. In Africa's corridors of power, dissent is contraband. Besigye, Mara, and Masra are not criminals. They are reminders that words still matter. And that is precisely why regimes treat them like weapons. Uganda kidnaps its critics. Mali prosecutes metaphors. Chad imprisons hunger. The continent does not lack for constitutions or elections. It lacks the courage to respect them. And so we circle endlessly. The general becomes the president becomes the monarch, the opposition becomes prisoner. But authoritarianism is a cowardly beast. It fears the tweet, the speech, the hunger strike, because it knows these are sparks. Sparks can light fires, and fires burn palaces. The irony, of course, is that the very men who claim to protect stability are the biggest sources of instability. After all, nothing says strong leadership quite like being terrified of a doctor, a starving man, and a poet. Good night.